Hello, 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 and welcome back after a 1 week hiatus to Touchdown with Hansen and Brown. I am, of course, David Hansen, and sitting with me today is the incomparable, unbeatable, unbelievably amazing Joe Brown.
Thank you for the kind words. You could totally beat me though, like very easily.
In what?
Like a 6-year-old child could be. I don't know.
It depends. It depends on what we're talking about, Joe.
Like tic-tac-toe, probably even. Maybe beat me in like a foot race. Probably I'm pretty slow.
But no one can beat you in pure charm.
I mean, have you seen Tangled? You ever heard of Flynn Rider, otherwise known as Eugene? I mean, that's some charm right there.
That is some charm right there. And before we charm you all with our show today, good transition, a quick disclaimer. You're listening to Pizza FM, freeform, non-commercial radio broadcasted in partnership with Unit 1 Living Learning Communities at the University of Illinois. The views expressed by individuals on Pizza FM are not necessarily those of Unit 1 or Pizza FM as a whole. Pizza FM is made possible through the generous support of SORF, the 1867 Society, CRFB, and listeners like you. Thank you. Joe, anything to say before we get started today?
Yes, you omitted one of the words in the disclaimer, and because of that, I fear we are going to be taken off air.
What word did I omit?
College. You said non-commercial radio broadcasted in partnership with Unit 1 instead of freeform non-commercial college radio broadcasted in partnership with Unit 1 Living Learning Community.
That is an important distinction. The difference between a regular radio and a college radio. One has a lot more, debt to, pay off, loans, student loans, a little bit of studying to do. The other one's laughing at the college student. But then the college radio says that everything's going to be... Never mind. Okay, we're moving on. So today we are talking week 11 for fantasy football. We'll recap week 10 and we'll move on to week 11 and what you should do as the fantasy playoffs are coming up soon.
It might have already started. It's not a great spot.
Your fantasy playoffs have already started?
Yep.
That's crazy.
Chudley Cobknockers lost their first place bye week. I'm currently in 5th. I barely stayed in the playoffs. I'm on a 3-game losing streak.
Rough.
Yeah.
Well, good luck this week, Joe Brown. Hopefully the Chudley Cobknockers can pull back into first place and win the league. So let's talk about news, because right now we're going to try to help you do everything you can, hopefully, to get prepared for the postseason. If you have a record where, you're just won't make the playoffs this season, I'm sorry to hear that, but hey, it's always good to stay informed and make some wise trades. Maybe you can get some glee by tanking some other people's teams and taking all the good players for yourself in trades. Alrighty. The first big piece of news out of the NFL is that number 1 ranked tight end right now in the National Football League, Austin Hooper of the Atlanta Falcons, has sprained his MCL. Yeah, been a rough year for tight ends as far as injuries. George Kittle's been injured. Obviously, Wilt Disley had that horrible season ending. Chris Herndon from the Jets has been both suspended and injured. Just a bad year for tight ends when it comes to injuries. And Austin Hooper is now aboard that train. With a sprained MCL, it's uncertain if he'll even be able to play for the rest of the fantasy season. And if I was an owner for the Atlanta Falcons, I'm not quite sure I'd want to bring him back either. This is not going to be a great season for them. I don't believe they're going to make the playoffs, so why bring back someone in even a worse injury? So if you're an Austin Hooper owner, what do you do? Probably hang on to him for right now. But, I mean, obviously he has to be on your bench. You could consider dropping him, but if he does come back into play, he's the number 1 tight end. But it is also hard to roster 2 tight ends. And your options on the waiver wire are very, very limited. Hopefully, when you drafted Austin Hooper, he wasn't the only tight end you drafted, because you were taking a risk on him earlier this season. A risk that paid off, but a risk nonetheless. However, you may be scouring the waivers for tight ends this week. Joe, if you are an Austin Hooper owner, would you try to make a trade to another team for their tight end, see what you've got? If you're in this scenario, are you hitting the waiver wire and just taking the loss and hope, or the loss of points and hope that the tight end just booms or gets you at least enough points that you need.
Look, here's the thing with tight ends this season. Who are you going to get? Who are you looking to grab off of this deal? Who's even available? Who could you trade? Like, who's the number one tight? Who is the number one tight end with Austin Hooper gone?
With Austin Hooper gone, that's a great question. My guess is probably Travis Kelce.
Right. I mean, you have to make the guess. Like, anyone who owns Travis Kelce isn't giving him up. George Kittle's currently injured. I mean, Hunter Henry's pretty good, but like anyone who owns him, probably not going to trade him. I found Greg Olsen on the waiver wire earlier today just because he's so inconsistent that whoever had him in my league dropped him. I currently have 3 tight ends on my team, and none of them are particularly good. I have Jimmy Graham, Jack Doyle, and Greg Olsen. And it's just, you're in a tough spot with tight ends this year. There's just no, I mean, you're shooting in the dark with any tight end that you pick up. I don't think it's worth it to trade good material just to get a tight end that's probably going to be just about as good as anyone you can get off of the waiver wire.
I agree. I think your best option right now, see if, as Joe said, Jack Doyle, he might be on your waiver wire. With T.Y. Hilton still out for this week, being injured, Jack Doyle might be a good pickup, as he'll pick up some of T.Y. Hilton's targets. You could get Darren Fells from Houston, but even that's kind of a stretch. It's not pretty on the waiver wire, but you'd have to give up a lot to get a tight end. You need to find something for the rest of the season, though. I think kind of someone who's, been inconsistent, but I think has a good end of season coming out for him. Just had a huge game against Cleveland is Noah Fant. Obviously, that's his one huge game he's really had, but, it's a good sign. With their new quarterback, since Joe Flacco's out for the rest of the season, if he relies on the short passes to the tight end, that could be very beneficial to Noah Fant of the Denver Broncos. So that's where we're at with tight ends. If you had Austin Hooper, I'm sorry. Hopefully you have your backup option. If someone offers you a good trade, maybe, but it looks like you're going to be hitting the waiver wire. Let's talk about some other NFL news, and we finally got to see this week what would happen with Kenyon Drake and David Johnson on the same team playing at the same time. Because when Kenyon Drake went off 2 weeks ago, David Johnson was unable to play. And the result was very lackluster. Kenyon Drake, 10.1 fantasy points. That's okay, I guess. But 6 of those came from targets, from receiving just PPR. 6 of those came from 6 catches. That's not very good, considering the rest of his points. That adds up to 4.1 points from total yardage. It's not good at all. But if that's not good, then David Johnson was absolutely horrible, getting you a grand total, Joe, of 0 points. David Johnson put up an old goose egg this week in the numbers column, or not in the yard column, but in the total fantasy points column. That was thanks to a fumble that he let go, and just a horribly inefficient day on the ground. Now, part of this has to do with how effective Kyler Murray was and how effective Christian Kirk was, both of which we'll get to later in the show, that they didn't need to rely on the running game. But this is probably a good indication of what's to come, where Drake and Johnson, both of them, their fantasy values are diminished because the other one is there. Now, obviously, Kenyon Drake didn't have too much fantasy value before this because he was on the Miami Dolphins. But this is a huge blow for David Johnson, who is typically a top 10 pick in fantasy drafts. I don't have much good news. I don't have much good outlook for David Johnson for the rest of the season. I think he's an RB2 at best, a flex option at worst, especially if they continue to split carries like this. If it continues to be a running back by committee in the Arizona backfield, it's not looking good. If David Johnson starts to take more touches, which hopefully it does now that he's more healthy, he could be a higher RB2, but I don't see him as an RB1, and especially not as a top 10 running back that he was drafted as. And I think that's just how it's going to be for the rest of the season. Now, if you can trade away David Johnson based on namesake alone, even if it's for 70% of what you could have gotten earlier in the season, I'd probably do so. I don't think his value is going to get much higher. Maybe you wait for a better week than 0 points, but there might not be too many better weeks coming up, and then if he establishes a pattern of poor play, that diminishes his value even further, and then you're just in trouble. So I would try to get out of the David Johnson business. Maybe if there's one good thing, it's that he has been able to catch passes in the past, and Kyler Murray's a great quarterback, or is turning out to be a great quarterback. But in this game, the running back they used to catch passes was Kenyon Drake, so you could be in a little bit of trouble. Let's go to a different backfield where there were two running backs coming into this game with uncertainty in what was going to happen and a much different outcome. And that is the Cleveland Browns. Yes, we're talking about the Cleveland Browns in a positive manner. The Cleveland Browns have two running backs, Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt, two very, very talented running backs, and we weren't quite sure what would happen once Kareem Hunt came back from suspension, how this backfield would look. Nick Chubb, 14.1 fantasy points on 20 carries. Kareem Hunt, 14.4 fantasy points on with 7 of those points coming from receptions, PPR receptions. Now, that isn't super high for either one. That's like a medium day for either player. But I think this provides a very good future for both players because they both have unique roles. Chubb still got 20 carries in this game, even with Kareem Hunt. So he is still the workhorse running back, while Kareem Hunt is going to be kind of the mix-up option. You know, when they want to change it up, they throw to Hunt in the backfield. Then you get that point for the PPR, and you get whatever yardage he gets. So Nick Chubb going forward, I still see him as a running back 1. And Kareem Hunt, I see him as a kind of a flex option until we see more from him. Joe, if you are looking at someone who has Nick Chubb, and you see they're getting a little antsy, how much are you willing to offer to trade for Nick Chubb?
Personally, don't need running backs. But in the situation where you do need running backs, Nick Chubb is a solid RB2 option. It's definitely a great flex. If somebody's trying to get rid of Nick Chubb, I would be willing to offer, in the situation where you have more wide receivers than you know what to do with and you need running backs, possibly like a good wide receiver that's around Chubb's caliber, and then maybe like a slightly worse running back, like make up for Chubb. I'd be willing to make that trade. I wouldn't trade any serious material for Nick Chubb at this point. But I mean, if someone's willing to trade him, you can make some plays to pull up for a solid running back too, if that's really what you need, because he would be a very consistent player to put on your team.
You bring up a good point in that don't let people, charge you too much for Nick Chubb. It's, this is only 1 week of Hunt and Chubb in the backfield. It could completely change next week. But I do like their schedule going forward, a very nice playoff schedule. So definitely someone I would look to trade for if you can. All right, let's move on over to the Dallas Cowboys and their two wide receivers who both had a pretty good game this week. Amari Cooper, a very good game, 31.7 fantasy points. There's not too much fantasy analysis to say about this. Amari Cooper is a wide receiver 1, has been, when he's been healthy, he's been a very, very good asset for the team and a good asset for your fantasy team. So keep starting him. Let's go over to Michael Gallup, though, who's had touchdowns in 2 straight games, and which looks, that's a good look for Michael Gallup. Until you look at the amount of receptions he's had for the past 2 games. In this game where he got 17.6 fantasy points, he only had 4 receptions. And last week, where he had, I think, just over 11 fantasy points, he only had 2 receptions. That's a little worrying. You like to see volume in fantasy football because it's hard to get a touchdown every week, but if you see someone consistently getting volume, they're going to have a steady floor for you. However, I do think Michael Gallup is a very talented player with a great quarterback throwing to him, and I like the Cowboys' offense. So I'm a little conflicted here whether I would be selling high on Michael Gallup or trying to buy low on him, or more importantly, if he is in your lineup, do you start him this week? Do you put him in a wide receiver 2 in a flex spot? What do you do with Michael Gallup? Joe, are you a Cowboy owner at all? I know you own Ezekiel Elliott.
I have Ezekiel Elliott, yes.
So, as someone who has experience with the Cowboys' offense, you could say they do put up a decent amount of points per game.
A decent amount of points. There have been disappointments, but overall Zeke's a pretty high floor player. I think he put up only 7 points this week, but that might have been because Amari Cooper was taking so much volume. 8.3 is what Zeke put up this last week. It was his worst week of the season. He's usually somewhere between 15 and 25 points.
Yeah, Minnesota did a good job of shutting him down that game. Plus, it was kind of a shootout game where they didn't need to throw. I wouldn't be too worried about Zeke. But as far as Amari Cooper, in a game that, or not Amari Cooper, Michael Gallup, in a game that was a shootout, you would have liked to see more than 4 receptions. If there's good news, I guess, it's that he did rack up 10 targets, which is that's a very steady amount. You would like to see him catch more of those, but Minnesota's a good defense. You can give him the benefit of the doubt. This week he's up against Detroit, another decently good defense. I think I would start him. The thing Detroit has is they have that one very good player, Slay. He'll probably be put on Amari Cooper, so maybe that opens up Michael Gallup this week. I think he's a good option. I think he's proved himself. I know you don't like 2 receptions or 4 receptions, but I think you ride the hot hand, and he has been a hot hand so far. But the 2 weeks after that, he's got New England, Buffalo, and then week 14, the first week of most playoffs, is Chicago. So that's a bit of a rough patch, but he ends with the Rams and Philly. So if you can get past week 14, those are 2 pretty good matchups for him. So if you're struggling to even make the playoffs and you need a good player week 12 and week 13, it might be worth to trade him away since New England and Buffalo have pretty good defenses. But if you're safely in the playoffs, hang on to him for now. Maybe even try to see what you can trade for him, though after 2 weeks of double-digit fantasy points, it might be hard. Alrighty. Let's go on over to LA, to the Chargers, a team that said they would consider moving to London, base their team out of London. I guess then you get a whole country rooting for you if all of England were to watch American football.
I think they're just trying to move farther away from San Diego because they feel awkward. The entire city of San Diego is like, hey, what you guys doing over there?
Hey, come back. And they're like, ooh, no.
Do you guys know we're the second biggest city in California? And the Chargers are like, why don't we just fly to London?
We'll just go across the sea. Maybe that'll help them play better, because other than beating my Packers 2 weeks ago, they have not been playing super well recently. But it is nice to see Melvin Gordon getting back on the right path. I had a feeling he would. I know there were some rough patches, and but I had a feeling you can't keep Melvin Gordon out too long. You need to let him get his funk in. I was trying to trade for Melvin Gordon in our league, Joe, but the guy who had him just wouldn't give him up. He was very stingy, which made me upset. I could have helped him. His record is not the greatest right now. I think he only has 3 wins, but no, he didn't want to trade. But that's fine. I'm fine. Everything is fine. Melvin Gordon is not the player I want to talk about. The player I want to talk about is Keenan Allen. This week with 16.6 fantasy points. Does this mean he's finally back after going through such a rut? Keenan Allen, a player you drafted maybe in the 3rd round, hoping to be a solid wide receiver 1, wide receiver 2, started out the season on a very high note with 26.3 fantasy points, 17.8, and 43.6. And it's all been downhill since then. 9.8, 5.8, 5.3, 10.1, 12.3, 7. And this week, 16.6. But the reason this week stands out is because he finally had 8 receptions for 68 yards. That's the first time he's had 8 receptions, or at least 8 receptions, after getting 8, 8, and 13 the first 3 weeks. So Keenan Allen, is he back? Is he back to what we're hoping? Because he's been kind of a wide receiver 3 when you drafted him to be much better than that. Are things looking better for Keenan Allen? Yes and no. The reason I say yes is because the Chargers' offense is finally looking decent again. Their offensive line was horrible those past couple of weeks, and he was not playing that well either. Phillip Rivers just wasn't getting the ball to him. The offense just wasn't working that well. Now they're starting to work decently well. Granted, it was Oakland, so not the stingiest defense. The problem is, the reason I say no is because they have Kansas City coming up this week, and that's a decent matchup. Then they have a bye, Denver Broncos, Jacksonville Jaguars, Minnesota, and then Oakland again, week 16 of the fantasy playoffs. It's not a great schedule, because Keenan Allen's going to get you 0 points on his bye. Denver has been a very good defense. The last time Keenan Allen played Denver, he had 4 catches for 18 yards and only 5.8 fantasy points. Then there's Jacksonville, who hasn't been as good of a defense as they have been in the past, but they are still a good defense. Same with Minnesota. It's just not a great schedule coming up for Keenan Allen. So I'm a little worried about him. He is a superstar, but he has not had superstar tendencies recently. So one game of decent amount of points does not sell me. Joe, if you're a Keenan Allen owner, are you trying to sell him right now? Or are you keeping your hopes high because you know how talented he can be?
I would hold on to Keenan Allen.
Okay.
I would be trying to trade him right now. I don't think you'd get too much trade value out of him.
Mm-hmm.
And you're probably better off just either leaving him as a flex option, or if you, for some reason, have 3 awesome wide receivers, leaving him on your bench until I think he has some good games ahead of him.
You're right, Joe. You probably don't have too many great replacement options for him. And if his ceiling is 43.6 fantasy points, I mean, I'd take that over, people you can find on the waiver wire or, people that were picked up off the waiver wire where it's like, yes, they have a steady floor, but no, they don't ever, reach as high as Keenan Allen can reach. So we will see going forward if Keenan Allen can keep up the right trend. But for now, I agree with Joe. Probably hang on to him. Maybe if you can get something based on name alone, if someone's like, oh, Keenan Allen, yeah, he's a good player. Yeah, I know that name, and you can get something good off him. Like if you could do straight up Keenan Allen for Nick Chubb, I'd take Nick Chubb. But I'm also a little biased because I love Nick Chubb. So yeah, that's where we stand on Keenan Allen. A couple more things to talk about this week, but before we do, let's switch it over to Joe Brown.
Awesome. I have been waiting patiently. We've been talking a lot today about players going off and having these really strange weeks where they're not really, we don't know if Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt are going to have this good of a week again. We don't know if Keenan Allen's going to pull up another 40-point game. Some players can pull that off. Some players don't. Sometimes you have players hit 0 points when you wish they would be a wide receiver 1. There are a lot of flukes in fantasy. Now, I went on a quest this week to try and find what were, in my opinion, the greatest flukes in fantasy football history. Now, here's the problem. I was not able to find too many because it turns out it's a really difficult thing to search for. I pretty much had to go through stats by hand and just pick random players and go through all of their previous year's stats to look for crazy games. It did not work out too well. And the 3 examples that I ended up putting together were off of my own memory of players that I knew had weird games in the past, and then I had to go find those games to give you the stats on them. So while it's not the most comprehensive list, I do think on this list I have the greatest fluke that has ever happened in fantasy football history. And so I'd like to talk about these. The first one is kind of an anti-fluke, and it happened this year. I'm sure we're all familiar with it.
Mm-hmm.
But in week 5 this year against New Orleans, against the Saints.
Oh, yep.
Mike Evans.
There he is.
A wide receiver who has put up 45 points, 42.8 points, 32 points, and averages about 20-ish points per game, put up 0 points.
0 points.
Had 3 targets and didn't catch any of them.
That's pretty bad.
That is just insane. We're talking about a player who, over the course of the season, has had 5 different games where he broke 28 points. And somehow he just didn't touch the ball.
I mean, that is that is the risk you run sometimes with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, because Jameis Winston has historically been hit or miss. Recently, he's actually been a very good quarterback. But historically, Jameis Winston is the guy who could throw for 500 yards or 5 interceptions. So sometimes that is bound to happen.
You are absolutely right. Sometimes the Buccaneers make crazy things happen. And the second thing I want to talk about also happened on the Buccaneers, though this player currently plays for the Miami Dolphins. I want to talk about Fitzmagic.
Fitzmagic!
Fitzmagic was a magical time when we as a community were starting to believe that Ryan Fitzpatrick might just be one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL.
The greatest trick that the devil ever pulled.
For about 3 or 4 consecutive weeks, he put up over 30-point games. 2 in particular, in back-to-back games, he had 8 touchdowns thrown over the course of 6 quarters of football with 417 and 402 yards on the 2 games, 32.9 and 32.1 points respectively, fantasy-wise. We were like, where the heck did Ryan Fitzpatrick come from?
That was amazing.
He was not even a player you would have drafted.
And what a personality, too.
Oh, yeah.
You know, he's just like screaming at the camera like, wah!
Oh, I have something else to add on top of that because I found this out while I was searching this.
Yes.
Fact. Are you aware of Ryan Fitzpatrick's alma mater?
Oh, my God. What is it?
Do you want to take a guess as to what college Ryan Fitzpatrick went to?
University of Illinois.
Absolutely not. We would talk about that all the time.
Dang
no,
it.
he went to Harvard.
What?
Yeah.
Ryan Fitzpatrick
Is
went
a
to...
Harvard grad.
What? Do you know his major?
Nope. Look it up.
I'm going to look it up right now.
Because I didn't find it on his Wikipedia. I found it on ESPN.
Huh. All right.
So there you have a Stop playing my own voice back into my... How dare you make
No,
use of my own voice?
I won't. There we go. Sorry, I had the live broadcast pulled up.
So, talking about crazy flukes, Ryan Fitzpatrick, crazy personality, went to Harvard University, is now currently not playing his best football in the Miami Dolphins, but they're currently trying to tank for Tua, so that's not really his fault.
A degree in economics.
Oh, wow, interesting. Yeah.
Anyways.
Talk about flukes. Now, the last one that I want to talk about, I only knew about this game because I happened to have this player on my fantasy team back in 5th grade when this game happened. And this fluke was so legendary that I really hope Danny Greedus is listening to this for some reason because I've told this story so many times that he just makes fun of me every time I tell it. But I won the first ever fantasy football league that I was ever in when I was in 5th grade. There was no draft. It was done randomly. Everyone was auto-draft. And I got locked out of my account about 2 weeks in. So I never touched my lineup for the entire season. And I won the entire league. Now, that was mostly through dumb luck. And the biggest dumb luck of it all was that I had Drew Brees as my quarterback.
Drew Brees.
Now, in one of the last games of the regular season, during my fantasy championship that year, Drew Brees had a game against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers that was so stellar that it is likely to never happen again.
How so?
Drew Brees broke 60 fantasy points that game.
Wow.
Drew Brees threw for 684 yards and 8 touchdowns.
In a single game?
In a single game. If I remember correctly, and I could not find the stats for this on ESPN, but in my memory, I think the Saints hit 80 points overall.
Wow.
They were just not letting up.
That is why Drew Brees belongs in the Football Hall of Fame. No one's arguing that. I made it sound like that was some
Drew
hot
Brees,
take. Drew Brees is really good.
Hot take. Drew Brees is a phenomenal quarterback. That game is probably never going to happen again. It's not that New Orleans didn't score 8 touchdowns. They scored way more than that. Drew Brees threw 8 touchdowns in one game. So Ryan Fitzmagic, where he threw 8 touchdowns over the course of 2 games, Drew Brees did that in one game. He threw for 684 yards. Ryan Fitzmagic, in his 2 games, threw 400 yards each. 700 yards Drew Brees threw in one game. And if you add up his rushing yards, which he had 12 rushing yards on that, if you add all the points together, he broke 60 fantasy points.
Wow. I bet his arm fell off after that game.
And that is what I call the greatest fantasy football fluke of all time.
Well, Drew Brees is nothing to scoff at. An amazing player. Before we get back to some fantasy analysis, we have a quick word from Ryan Fitzpatrick.
Came down on me. Is this live?
Of course it's live.
It's magic we saw of the first couple weeks. Jameis Winston's 4-interception game.
Thank you, Ryan Fitzpatrick. Joe, let's talk about quarterbacks. We have plenty of time to do so, so we will. Quarterback is an integral part of your fantasy football team. Normally, you only start one, but there are leagues where you have to start two. We'll be talking about the standard PPR where you have to start one. Usually keep one on your bench. Let's talk what you should do with the end of the season coming up, because your quarterback choice could be the difference between winning your league and falling flat on your face. So let's talk about some quarterbacks. How about Carson Wentz? Now, Carson Wentz, coming into this season, was a very exciting player. Quarterback for the Eagles, had many great weapons at his disposal. Zach Ertz, Alshon Jeffrey, Deshaun Jackson, Dallas Goedert. Unfortunately, the Eagles have not lived up quite to the hype, especially with Deshaun Jackson being out injured for a very long time, and Alshon Jeffrey also being out for a little bit in there, and Zach Ertz not having as amazing of a season as he had last year. And because of that, Carson Wentz, while he is an incredible quarterback from an NFL standpoint, this year has only had 3 games over 20 fantasy points, has averaged 17.0 fantasy points, which puts him around QB 14, not adjusting for buys. That's not good. That's not very good at all. Not what you were hoping from someone you probably drafted as a, top 7 quarterback. And he had a tough week this last week. It was a decent game for him, but wasn't a great game. And this upcoming week against the Patriots doesn't look much better because it's the New England Patriots, the best defense in the NFL right now, I would argue. And also not a hot take. So, with Carson Wentz, while he has not been too exciting, you would think, maybe I should put him on my bench, find a replacement, trade him away. Joe, I would argue you should trade for Carson Wentz.
Why is that, Dave?
You should buy low on Carson Wentz. Let me tell you about his schedule after the New England Patriots, because this is the last tough week he has for the rest of the season. Let's go through it. Patriots, that's harsh. How about the Seattle Seahawks? That's not so bad. Decent defense. Minnesota, all right. Can be tough, but, not horrible against quarterbacks. The New York Giants. Sam Darnold just had his best game against the New York Giants, so you like that matchup. How about the Washington Redskins, a team that's been dead in the water since week 1? Yeah, you like that matchup. Even though their defense is, decent, you still like that matchup. And how about Dallas, who, if Minnesota showed us anything this past week, also doesn't play defense too hard? Yeah, I like the Eagles matchups coming up for Carson Wentz. Now, I know he hasn't been incredible in the stats category, but you watch the Eagles play. He is a very smart and a very well put together quarterback. I remember watching that game where he had the diving touchdown. I think it was against the Cowboys, if I'm not mistaken. And when he rushed in for that touchdown, that saved my fantasy. I won that week in a league because of Carson Wentz by 2 points because he rushed that touchdown in. So you watch Carson Wentz, and it's just something to the eye test, where he is incredibly athletic, and he looks very, very good in the games. So I would trade for Carson Wentz. I would have a backup option in case things go south. Maybe someone you've picked up from the waiver wire that we'll talk about later. But I do like the prospect of Carson Wentz going into the fantasy playoffs. Let's talk about another player, someone who I just mentioned, Sam Darnold. Had 21.7 fantasy points. That's pretty good. What's not good? That's his best game of the year so far. Now, he has been out with mono for a couple of those games, but you remember his game against the Patriots where he threw a whole lot of interceptions, and he said, quote, "I'm seeing ghosts." Yeah, that's not what you like to hear from a quarterback you're going to start in your fantasy league. But he does have great matchups coming up, decent matchups for the rest of the season. My only worry is, in this game where he had 21.7 fantasy points, 6 of those points came from a rushing touchdown. So if you take that out, it's another meh week for Sam Darnold. And going forward, I hoped for more from Sam Darnold, but I just don't see him being amazing, especially in the fantasy playoffs. I think he has a couple good games left out of him, but not someone that super excites me for the fantasy playoffs. Plus, it's the New York Jets, It's not exactly a team that inspires confidence. It was cool to see them beat the Cowboys, but since then, they have not looked all that good. Let's talk about their opponent this week, or this previous week, the New York Giants, with Daniel Jones, who had 30.3 fantasy points. And it seems like we're always talking about Daniel Jones as a boomer and bust quarterback, where one week we get excited because he got 30.3 points, and the next week he completely stinks the bed. Joe, if you are a Daniel Jones owner, you look at his upcoming schedule for the playoffs, and you see a bye this week, but then you see Philly, Miami, Washington. Those are some pretty good matchups. How do you feel about Daniel Jones?
I would feel pretty optimistic about Daniel Jones going forward. Ideally, Daniel Jones is not your starting quarterback, but a lot of stuff has happened with quarterbacks this season, and he might be your starting quarterback. And those are some pretty decent matchups. I would have pretty high hopes that he can pull some at least mid-range games against the Dolphins and the Redskins.
I would hope so too. And I mean, you could justify starting him, especially if your starting quarterback has a rough matchup that week. Even if he has like a decent matchup, you could justify starting him in the playoffs. Philly's a great matchup. Miami's a great matchup. Washington's a decently good matchup. Granted, the last time he played Washington, only 12.3 fantasy points, so maybe you avoid them. But that was also earlier in the season when, he was still getting a hold of the reins on the team, who he's throwing to and stuff. Darius Slayton has been, stepped up huge for them as a wide receiver. Yeah, I like Daniel Jones. Now, obviously, he has a bye this week. Won't get you any points there. Then Chicago and Green Bay, who have been, decently stingy defenses. It's hard to trust him 12 or 13, but I do like him for the fantasy playoffs. Let's talk about two more quarterbacks here. Let's start with my boy, Aaron Rodgers, who got a wonderful, whopping 10 points this week against Carolina, following a week where he got 12.9 fantasy points against the Chargers.
But you know who didn't get 10 points?
Who?
Aaron Jones.
Yeah.
Who needs to throw the ball when you can just hand it to Aaron Jones and let him score 4 touchdowns a game?
That's a good point. Aaron Jones is a very good running back. And I think you bring up a good point in that the Packers don't have to throw to win games. I mean, obviously, against the Chargers, they lost. But there's been plenty of games this year where Aaron Rodgers not looking good in the stat lineup, but it doesn't matter because they're winning those games. And if it ain't broke, no need to fix it. I mean, they're 8-2 at this point. So they have a bye this week. And then he comes back against San Francisco. You don't like that matchup. And then the Giants. You do like that matchup. And then you look at the fantasy playoffs, where you have Washington, Chicago, Minnesota. Now, Washington, you're like, oh, not a bad defense. He should do well against them. Except the thing is, when the Packers get up, when they play these bad teams and they get up ahead early, they just give the ball to Aaron Jones. I don't see Aaron Rodgers having a great game against Washington because I think they're going to smack Washington. And so they won't need to use Aaron Rodgers. Against the Bears, that's a tough matchup for Aaron Rodgers. When he faced them at week 1 this season, 12.9 fantasy points. They've got his number, especially Khalil Mack. He always finds his way to Aaron Rodgers. I don't like him there. Minnesota, I do kind of like him there. I know earlier this year he only had 14.4 fantasy points, but I feel like it's the right kind of matchup where it's going to be a competitive game and they're going to rely on him to throw the ball. But even still, he had that 143.8 fantasy point game earlier this year against Oakland, week 7, and he started to get excited, and he followed up with 27.1. You're like, oh, this is great. But the last 2 weeks, 12.9 and 10, frankly, have been more consistent with what the rest of the season has been. So if you're an Aaron Rodgers owner, good luck selling him. I don't know if you're going to be able to sell him. And at this point, I don't think I would sell him because if all of a sudden the Packers do start relying on him, then it's good to keep him on your bench. But I would be looking for backup options like Daniel Jones or, maybe try to trade for Carson Wentz or see what you can grab on the waiver wire week to week. Hopefully you have a backup option for Aaron Rodgers since he was pretty bad earlier in the season. It's just, it's hard to be an Aaron Rodgers owner right now. And with a heavy heart, I say as a Packers fan, I say probably don't start Aaron Rodgers. Joe, how does that make you feel?
I'm pretty happy about it. Aaron Jones is demolishing everyone.
Well, he's on a bye this week, so take that, Joe.
Yeah, I know he's on a bye. It's not great for me right now, but I'm still pretty. He's the number 3 running back in the league right now. He has had, I think, 3 different 40-point games.
Sounds about right. We can look that up right now with our. Let's get our stats guy on it. Hey, stats guy, can you look it up really quickly?
Yep.
What are you saying?
Looks like Aaron Jones had a 49.2, a 41.6, and he did not break 40 again, but he put up 27.3 this last week.
Oh, okay. Thank you. That's our stats guy, everyone. We would be nothing without our research team, so give a big hand to them.
Absolutely not.
Thank you, stats guy.
It truly takes a village.
One of these days, I'll learn his name. Probably not anytime soon. It is interesting with Aaron Jones to see how he has been a little boomy or busty, but when he has been boomy, it's been very good booms. And really, when I say bust, he's only had 3 weeks that have not been great. But like those 3 weeks, when they haven't been great, they've been abysmal. 3.9, 4.9, 8. Now, one of those came week 1 of the fantasy season against the Bears. One of those was against the Chargers where they had just a really bad game. So I'm not too worried about it. He has more good games than bad games, and he's an incredible talent. So not too worried about Aaron Jones. Let's quickly talk about our final quarterback, and then we have some big news for the future of the show. Let's talk about Kyler Murray of the Arizona Cardinals. He has been an all-star this week, and while I say with Daniel Jones, you can probably trust him going forward, I am sold on Kyler Murray. I think he is an amazing talent, and he is definitely worth the first-round pick that the Cardinals drafted him for. 26.8 fantasy points this week. He is the real deal. Now, his next game is against San Francisco, and while normally that's you don't like the sound of that, remember, the Cardinals were the team that 2 weeks ago finally showed everyone how to beat the San Francisco defense. He scored last time they played the San Francisco 49ers 2 weeks ago, 23 points, 23 fantasy points. Every other quarterback against the San Francisco had not been as fortunate against the San Francisco 49ers have not been as fortunate. I think Kyler Murray is a great bet for the rest of the season. I think he's a very, very talented quarterback. I think what he provides both in the air and on the ground, as he's a very agile guy and, is a very good runner as well, is definitely some great upside. And after his bye week 12, he gets the Rams, the Steelers, the Cleveland Browns, and the Seattle Seahawks. A decent lineup going forth, but he can make those very good. I know he's had some down weeks, but I trust Kyler Murray going forward. Currently ranked as the 5th quarterback overall, that's kind of shocking. So it shouldn't, obviously it shouldn't be a huge deal, but I think when you think of Kyler Murray, you don't think the 5th quarterback overall. Granted, he hasn't had his bye yet, but still, the fact that he's top 10 shows that he should be in your lineup going forward week to week.
Now, here's an interesting predicament for you, David.
Yes.
I have Kyler Murray in our league that we're in together, but I also have Carson Wentz. So, getting some conflicting advice here from you.
Joe, if you have Carson Wentz and Kyler Murray, this week you should play Kyler Murray. Next week, when Kyler Murray has a bye, you should play Carson Wentz. Thank you, everyone, for some really good, thank you. Thank you for applauding for my amazing fantasy advice. But I see what you're saying. Going forward into the playoffs, what do you do? Until we see Carson Wentz really start to play well, and I don't mean this week against the Patriots, but I'm hoping week 13, if you see good stuff from Carson Wentz, then maybe against some of those really nice matchups, you can start Carson Wentz. But I think you've got a star with Kyler Murray. So for right now, I'd be playing Kyler Murray. Alrighty. Maybe if there's someone who's heads up in your fantasy league, that's like in our fantasy league, who's looking for a quarterback, to play during the fantasy playoffs. And if, they reach out to you, maybe you can try to, they're like, oh, I like Carson Wentz's matchups going forward. Maybe a fellow listener of the show, then you can be like, yeah, okay, you can have Carson Wentz and then make a good deal for it, get a spot you need, and then you have a quarterback going forward and you have a position player, you'd be set. All right, that is the end of the fantasy football for this week. And our big announcement is that that is the end of fantasy football on this show
Forever.
forever. Okay, well, maybe
Maybe
not
not
forever, but
We
for
might come
for
back
this
next
season,
year.
we might come back. Talk a little bit. Spit out some fantasy advice. But we've been talking. We've been talking about the future of Touchdown with Hansen and Brown, and it's been fun. It's been a great intro into podcasting with Joe and I. Intro into radio shows. We hadn't really done this kind of stuff before. Joe obviously has his YouTube channel where he occasionally posts vlogs and videos and stuff. Check it out at Promptly Joe Brown. But other than that, not too much experience with this radio stuff. So it was talking about something we both, partaked in, fantasy football. We did it together. It was a good way to start up this show. But, it's kind of a niche audience. You only get so far. And we want to include you, the listener, anyone who's tuning into this right now, but also some of our friends and, anyone who's interested in more general stuff. And we feel like a more free-formed approach to podcasting and talking about different stuff would be, more engaging. So we decided that the future of the show is going to be called
Breakdown with Hansen and Brown.
The Breakdown, where we will break down whatever we feel like week to week. And we want to start bringing on maybe some guests, maybe some of our friends, maybe some people here at U of I. Just bring them onto the show, talk to them about, stuff that's going on right now in the world, maybe some existential, some deep questions, ask them about their life, stuff they're interested in too, because I always find it interesting to hear what people are passionate about. But most importantly, we're going to be funny and we're going to have a good time because Joe and I, are funny people.
I like to think so.
So if that's something that interests you going forward, stay tuned. Joe and I will be doing that week to week. We'll come back next week, hopefully, with a guest. If not, there will be just Joe and I episodes, and those will be equally as entertaining.
Oh, yeah, we could talk about all sorts of stuff. David could finally explain what the heck actuarial science is. I could tell you how a computer works. And there's all so many things we could talk about.
Joe was just telling me earlier about how he was putting together some circuit machine, some electrical engineering stuff so he can turn on and off his light switch by just pushing a button on his desk.
Yeah, I'm very lazy. Oh, no, the button's going to be next to my bed. I
Oh.
don't want to get up to turn off the light.
Sorry, my apologies. Next to his bed. So, it's just going to be random stuff like that. Maybe bring a friend on. We could talk about, we've got a friend who's been interested in dog training. Got another friend who's very big into, the musical world, but also works with psychology, which is kind of a cool mix. We've got a friend who's currently between switching majors, and she can tell you about the process of that. Some practical stuff, some fun stuff. Maybe some weeks talk about what the meaning of life is. Just random stuff, whatever we feel like week to week, because we can.
Maybe I'll do a book report and read some poetry.
This is a review of Harper Lee's follow-up to To Kill a Mockingbird, where it's called something. Go send the Watchman. I don't even know the name of it. Whatever the sequel, Harper Lee's book. We will be talking about that book. Probably never, but if we did, that is an option. We could. You don't know what's coming.
We could talk about the fanfic where an avid fan of Harper Lee's To Kill a Mockingbird rewrote the story so that the black guy actually did commit the heinous crime. I don't know if that exists. It probably does.
The views of expressed by individuals on PizzaFM are not necessarily those of Unit 1 or PizzaFM as a whole. Take what we say with a grain of salt. So yeah, you don't know what's going to come out of our mouths. It's random. We can talk
It could be all sorts of stuff.
anything we want. We could talk about the market of baby food that's out right now. Baby food. Ooh. We could talk about the monopoly that the NCAA has over college sports. We could talk about trains and how much they excite us because I love trains.
I like trains.
I like trains. We're going to talk about whatever the heck we want because we can, and that's what we're going to do. And you can't stop us, dear listener. You can, however, send in suggestions for our show, or if you would like to be a guest on our show, if you're in the Urbana-Champaign area, area,
Rio.
we would love to have you. Joe, we've got 4 minutes left to ramble.
4 minutes left to ramble.
Ramble.
You know, I would just
Ramble,
feel like
ramble,
just
ramble.
talk about things that we could talk about.
Hey,
Wow,
I have a thing we could talk about.
What?
Joe, on your YouTube channel, you just recently came out with the state vlog, the speech state vlog part 2.
Yeah, it's pretty niche.
Woo!
I don't know how big the speech community is.
Probably as big as the fantasy football community, though I don't imagine there's a lot of overlap.
Yeah, that's not a really. It's kind of talking about two separate circles there. I mean, pretty similar to this broadcast. I'm trying to not move away from speech. Still post a lot of speech stuff, but I'm trying out some other things
What is-
with that.
What is it like to run a YouTube channel? You know?
It's usually pretty low key. I mean, I just today got a much nicer camera because 2 of the videos on my channel were filmed by a friend of mine, Zach Bernstein, who has amazing camera
Zach Bernstein.
equipment and actually knows what he's doing. And the rest of them were filmed on my cell phone, which is not the worst quality, but not very good along with that. So hopefully today I'll learn how to do some more of that. But it's a bit of a learning curve. Certain things go about how you expect them to, filming stuff, but then editing videos, sometimes it's just a little bit too time consuming to work on, so it takes a while to just get around to it. And actually posting things onto YouTube is surprisingly easy. You just kind of have to, you just go, hey, YouTube, take this, and then it loads for like 20 minutes, and then boom, you got a YouTube video.
And, you know, it's interesting to see how despite, you know, you have some niche stuff with the, you know, speech team and stuff, but it really does reach people. What is it like? What's the feeling of that when, you know, like you open up your YouTube channel and you see, like, I know your speech stereotype video, it's nearing 1,000 views, right?
It is very close to 1,000 views.
That's
and
crazy.
I can't comprehend how that video, it is currently at, I'm opening my YouTube right now, 938 views.
938. That's huge.
The thing that's crazy about it to me is just that when I made it, I thought, oh, my friends will like this. I've got like 30 kids on the speech team that I know will like to watch this video, and I thought it was fun to film, and I involved a lot of people in it. And when I posted, I told all my friends, like, hey, you guys should go check out this video because I know you all helped me film it. And then they told some of their friends. And then their friends told some of their friends. And it became so popular in the speech community that I found out like weeks later from people that like their friend from Hinsdale South hit them up and was like, have you seen this Joe Brown speech stereotypes video? It's hilarious. I'm like, I don't know how it got there. I didn't tell anybody in Hinsdale. I don't even know.
I don't associate with Hinsdale
I don't
South.
associate with Hinsdale. I don't know how it got over there. And it has, over the course of the time I posted it in March, I believe, it has never stopped getting views.
Wow.
It got like a steady, like it jumped up to about 100 in 1 week. And it has very steadily got somewhere between 5 and 7 views a day since then.
Crazy how stuff like that, you know?
It's pretty close to 1,000 now. It just hasn't stopped. So I mean,
It's spread like the plague.
Yeah, I don't know about the plague.
Joe, you're a plague on the speech community, but a very good, a nice plague, in the sense that you spread. You know, your content spreads.
Yeah, like a good margarine. It's I don't know. It's just interesting. It's not like YouTube fame. Obviously, I only have like 27 subscribers, but from my perspective, it's nice to see that a thing that I made was appreciated by a group of people.
Yeah, it's cool to see that your content and stuff get out there.
It's just nice that people are seeing it.
Yeah.
You know, 50 views are better than 0.
That, I would have to agree. All right. So that's just kind of a small taste of, you know, what the future of our show will be like. You know, just talking about whatever we feel like it. You know, personal life stuff, broader world stuff, maybe some university stuff.
Maybe have some more research put into it.
No. Maybe. Well, we could get our research team on. Hey, research guy, you okay?
Yeah.
If we switch from football to other people?
Yeah, I guess I could write like a book report or something.
Yeah, you could just you don't mind like reaching out to people and asking them about their lives so we have stuff beforehand?
That's probably better than doing fantasy football math.
What's that supposed to mean?
It doesn't mean anything.
Did you not enjoy your job so far on this?
Doesn't mean anything at all, sir.
We could fire you.
I appreciate my job very
Yeah, you better. This is a pretty demanded position right now.
I understand that, sir. I'm very happy to have my current role. in this organization.
You better be.
Thank you, sir.
This is why we don't pay you.
I understand, sir.
Like we said, we love our research team. What would we do without him?
So, yeah, what would we do without that guy?
Yeah, him. Without him. All right. Well, good night to everyone out there listening in Radio Land, tuning in on PizzaFM.org. Coming up, some more music. Thank you. And next week we'll be back with a special guest. We don't know who yet. We'll figure it out. It's in the works. Everything's in the works. It's a process. Return to Rick and Morty. Rick and Morty season 4 is back.
It's a process, Morty.
Okay.
Rick and
Goodbye.
Morty season 4. Rick and Morty forever.
Rick and Morty forever. 10 seasons. Goodbye.